Shalom VFI News supporters and anyone else watching this report. It's been another amazing week here in Israel, but some of the biggest headlines come from outside the country, including the announcement by French President Emmanuel Macron that he intends to recognize a Palestinian state, the reactions he got from U.S. President Donald Trump, as well as some of his fellow European heads of state was probably not what he was hoping for. In Gaza, the big word being thrown around is famine, and everyone is blaming Israel for it, whether it's actually happening or not. That's the surreal world we live in, and I'm afraid it's just going to keep getting worse. But speaking of things just getting worse, there is a major drought and water shortage in Iran, which is both a product and an effect of the electricity crisis. It's gotten so bad that the wicked Ayatollah regime has taken the extraordinary step of apologizing to its own people about it. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. I have to start this week's report with something that might sound ho-hum, but it's not. Israel is sweating through a brutal heat wave this week. Now, I must emphasize that every summer for the past several years, the temperatures have been getting higher, and the trends have been starting earlier in the spring. Now, this last winter saw the lowest levels of precipitation in Israel for many years, and in some parts of the country there was less rain than any winter since records began being kept in the late 19th century. But after that unusually dry winter, we're getting an unusually hot summer, and it's putting a lot of pressure on the infrastructure, especially the electricity grid, which of course is what we use to power the air conditioning, water pumps, etc. It's also having an effect on economic activity as a whole, since work at construction sites and other outdoor activities has slowed down considerably and even been suspended for safety reasons in some places. Now, these heat waves, which, as I said, are getting more severe and lasting longer every summer, also take a fair number of lives every summer, as elderly people, children, and those with chronic medical conditions are especially vulnerable to heat-related injuries and dehydration. So if you pray for Israel, this is an important area to pray into. Now it could be worse, and in some of Israel's neighbors, it has been worse. This past week has seen ferocious wildfires breaking out in Cyprus, Turkey, Greece, and elsewhere in southeastern Europe. Israel sent firefighting aircraft to help out in Cyprus, and there might be a lot more work for those crews before the summer is over. For that matter, the summer heat will probably be with us for several more weeks before it begins to cool off, and I don't want to make any predictions about when it might start raining. This is a serious problem, and like I said, we need a lot of prayer. However, we've got something here in Israel that most of our neighbors don't have, which helps alleviate the problem, and that's a large complex of saltwater desalination plants and solar power banks. This gives us a cushion, but it costs an enormous amount of money and effort. So if you've got friends in Israel and all they want to talk about these days is the terrible heat wave we're dealing with, now you know why. But let me tell you something else. As bad as the heat in Israel is this past week, it's even worse in Iran, and they don't have the tools to deal with it that we do. Temperatures in some areas of Iran this week have been reportedly approaching the mid-60s Celsius, which is almost 150 degrees Fahrenheit for comparison. I don't know how it's even possible for human beings or most animals to live in such temperatures. I think the water would evaporate right out of my body, leaving me in a desiccated husk if I spent even 1 hour in those kinds of temperatures. But severe heat is only one problem they're dealing with in Iran this week. They also have an electricity crisis, which I'm sure is causing many fatalities because people can't use the air conditioning to keep cool. I didn't know they have air conditioners. Well, on top of everything else, they are also facing a shortage of clean drinking water. The situation has gotten so severe that the government has been forced to implement water rationing. That's not really much of a surprise, but there has been a surprise in the form of an apology about the situation from the regime's energy and infrastructure minister, Ali Abdul Maleki, who said, quote, "I apologize to the Iranian people for the drop in water pressure in certain areas. We have no water and we have no choice," unquote. Well, friends, I'm no expert on Iran, but I've been around for a while and I've watched how this regime treats its own people. The picture that emerges from decades of this observation is that the regime sees the Iranian people as nothing but a resource to be exploited in the pursuit of fanatical ideological objectives such as exporting the revolution and a global Shiite-run Islamic caliphate. For a senior figure in this regime to humble himself before these people, apologize to them, and admit that there are no good options left is nothing short of phenomenal. I can only speculate that someone in the regime has finally gotten it through his head that this population is really sick and tired of all the hardships they've had to endure for the sake of a nuclear weapons program most of them don't even want. You can add to that the endless support for Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, which most of them don't even want. The ballistic missile program, and that most of them don't even want, and which anyway proved so ineffective against Israel in the 12-day war last month, and so on and so forth. These people have tried to rise up against their regime several times in the past 20 years, but each time there just weren't enough people, and the people weren't desperate enough to overcome the Shiite brute force this regime was willing to use to suppress them. With this terrible heat wave, water, and electricity shortage all hitting at once, that might finally be about to change. Now, the cherry on top of everything is that Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is making noises about wanting to go another round with Israel, thinking maybe this time he'll have better results. If he does that, Israel and probably the United States will launch airstrikes on the regime that will be far more devastating than what happened in June, and that'll finally be the end of this regime one way or the other. Khamenei must know that on some level, but maybe he just doesn't even care anymore. A report on a Mossad-linked social media account says that he takes drugs and sleeps most of his time away. I doubt that's true, but there's no question that he is not running on all cylinders these days. Few people at that age do, and most people that age haven't had as much stress in their lives as he has. But even if Iran doesn't launch another round of ballistic missiles at Israel in the days ahead, there's still a threat from Hezbollah in Lebanon. To get you caught up on them, it's been almost 8 months since the ceasefire, which ended active hostilities between Hezbollah and Israel. Hezbollah hasn't fired even a single rocket, missile, or drone into Israel during that time. But Israel has launched several airstrikes to take out Hezbollah commanders as they were detected moving around south of the Litani River, apparently trying to gather new recruits and otherwise prepare for another round with the IDF. This is a violation of the ceasefire agreements, and so the IDF hit them. As I've said on this show before, I more than half suspect that it's none other than the Lebanese National Army, which is quietly passing the intelligence on to the IDF, which is enabling them to hit these guys. The LNA, as they're known, has taken down some low-level Hezbollah guys themselves, but I think they prefer to let the IDF take out the really big fish. In any case, Hezbollah has been so weakened that the internationally recognized government of Lebanon, backed by the United States and France, has issued a demand that Hezbollah fully disarm, and Hezbollah has not taken well to that demand. In crude language, they've told the government they won't disarm, and if the National Army tries to force them to, they're ready to fight back. In other words, they're threatening to throw Lebanon into another round of civil war just to avoid what General Secretary Naim Qassem said would be the humiliation of disarming and becoming just another political party in Lebanon. Now, the reason all this is important for Israel is that if Hezbollah refuses to hand over its heavy weapons to the Lebanese National Army, the plan is for the Israeli Air Force to bomb all those weapons. Apparently, the Mossad knows where they are, and once again, the Lebanese National Army probably provided most of that information. In any case, if this were to become necessary, it's not unlikely that Israel's home front would once again be subjected to incoming rockets, mortars, missiles, and drones from Hezbollah and possibly other regional actors. That might be the moment when Iran itself tries to once again fire a barrage of missiles at us just to see if they could get a few through the defenses while we're distracted by Hezbollah in the north. The Houthis in Yemen, who this week again threatened to renew attacks on ships sailing to and from Israeli ports, might also try their luck at lobbing a few more ballistic missiles our way. If all that happens, or even part of that were to happen, Israel's home front could once again turn into a war zone. It is because of this possibility that here at Vision for Israel, we're continuing to raise funds to place bomb safety shelters in public places all over Israel. We've already placed over 450 shelters at bus stops, in front of schools, public parks, sports fields, and other outdoor venues. And we're going to keep right on placing them, but we need your help to do so. So please watch this short video, which many of you have seen, but I want to get it into your hearts about this vitally important project to save human lives. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021. During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop, or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that you know having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. And Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight on rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected. Welcome back, friends. Now there's another big story, or actually a few big stories out of the Gaza Strip this past week. The biggest story that everyone seems fixated on surrounds a word with heavy biblical connotations, and that's famine. There is, according to some reports, a famine going on in Gaza, with large numbers of children literally starving to death. Well, this, the reports say, make it necessary for this war to come to an immediate end so that shipments of food and other humanitarian aid can get into these poor, starving people who need it. Now, to get this said right from the beginning, there are starving people in the Gaza Strip that includes many children. Israel is aware of that, and the IDF has been facilitating the delivery of enormous quantities of food, medicine, and other humanitarian aid supplies into the Strip ever since this war started. In recent months, this has been primarily done through an American-based NGO called the GHF, or the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. This NGO has been delivering food directly to civilians, bypassing the UN and not allowing this humanitarian aid to be pillaged by Hamas or anyone else. This was done in order to care for these civilians while allowing the IDF to continue fighting Hamas, and it was working very well. In fact, it was working so well that Hamas started opening fire on Gazan civilians as they attempted to approach the GHF distribution centers so that people would stop going there. So when this didn't work, Hamas began spreading rumors that the IDF was deliberately opening fire on these crowds, using food to lure hunger, desperate people into range so they could be slaughtered. This false, and I repeat, false narrative should never have been taken seriously by anyone, as it was so obviously a lie meant to serve the agenda of Hamas. But many international media outlets did take it seriously, or at least pretended to, and soon governments in Western countries started hearing from their voters saying this situation is unacceptable and Israel must be stopped. You see how easy deception gets into the minds of people? Well, there has been a lot of pressure brought against Israel to stop this war in Gaza, and some of it is coming from the grassroots here in Israel itself. There's all kinds of reasons for this, and I talked about it in last week's show when I said all of it comes down to fatigue. There is also a growing sense of concern about the mental health of thousands of IDF soldiers and reservists who have been fighting in Gaza and on other fronts. There's going to need to be a lot of counseling and assistance to these guys for a long time, and that's just one of the many considerations. There is also the threat that the governing coalition led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which has been shaking for a while now, might finally come apart at the seams under all this internal and external strain. Netanyahu is already leading a minority government, and he's trying some fairly desperate measures to keep things together and avoid going to fresh elections for a little bit longer. I don't even want to get into this story because at least some of what I'd need to explain would be speculative at best. But the point is that we could be getting an announcement of new elections at any moment. If that happens, there's a better than 50-50 chance, in my humble estimation, that Netanyahu's long run as prime minister could finally come to an end, and then we'll have a whole new situation for better or for worse. But once again, that's speculation. And before we move on, I want to circle back to the issue of these reports about famine in the Gaza Strip, and almost everyone holding Israel responsible for it and giving Hamas a free pass. Hamas could end this war immediately if it were to release the remaining hostages and agree for what's left of its leadership to go into exile. They almost certainly would have done just that already, and these poor Gazan people who definitely are hungry and in need of relief would be getting everything they need by now, if it wasn't for all the rhetorical and diplomatic support Hamas has gotten. I'm talking to you, members of the United States Congress and European national parliaments who keep making vacuous, dishonest statements of criticism for Israel that you know aren't accurate just to try and get a few more votes. I'm talking to you, members of the international media who make videos, print stories, and post photographs which you know very well aren't telling the whole story. But more than anyone else, I'm talking to you, French President Emmanuel Macron, who this past week made the incredible, in a bad way, announcement that he plans to extend recognition of a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly meeting in September. This announcement was met with outrage from Jerusalem, but U.S. President Donald Trump had what I would say is an even better response, lightheartedly telling reporters, quote, "That's what he says, doesn't matter. It's not going to change anything. The statement doesn't carry any weight," unquote. Other Western governments had responses somewhere in the middle of this spectrum, with the UK saying it would only extend recognition to a Palestinian state in the context of a broader agreement, whatever that means. Australia made a statement saying that although in their view Israel is breaking international law in Gaza, recognizing a Palestinian state at this time wouldn't improve the situation for anyone. Italy's government made a similar statement, but my personal favorite was Dutch politician Geert Wilders, who posted a statement on X featuring a map of southern France as a good suggested location for the new Palestinian state, along with a caption saying, quote, "Here will be the new Palestinian state. Big parts of France are already Islamic anyway. The Netherlands will close its borders immediately," unquote. The post was viewed millions of times in the first 48 hours after he put it up. It was also widely reported on, with much of the commentary being positive. I'd like to add my own positive comment to what Wilders said, although I'd add a footnote that it makes me very sad to see a country that has been a pillar of Western civilization almost since the beginning going so far down the tube so fast, and almost entirely because the elites of that country have decided that that's what they want to do. The ordinary people of France have little to say in the matter, being bullied and threatened by their own government into towing the woke line. That's not just my opinion, by the way. I hear it all the time from French Jews who have immigrated to Israel. More and more of them are coming as they see the handwriting on the wall, and they know they need to get out of there while they still can. That's another big story that's sort of happening behind the scenes here over the past few months, friends, is a large and growing wave of new immigrants coming into Israel from all over the world, but in particularly high numbers from France, as well as the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. Anti-Semitism is a growing issue in these Western countries, and it's pushing French, American, Canadian, and British Jews to make Aliyah. That means going up to Israel. I believe this is prophetic, and I believe God is in it, but it's still a very sad situation. Also, the government of Israel, as well as civil society, is having to spend a ton of money to try and assist these new immigrants with all the things they need to make a new life in their ancestral homeland. Although we're happy to see them, we're also somewhat frantic to try and get them squared away. There's been a shortage of housing in Israel for many years, and no matter how fast we build new houses and apartments, we just can't seem to keep up with the demand. Then there's all the new schools we need to build, more teachers to hire, and older schools that need to be fixed up and renovated because Israelis love life so much they just keep having more and more babies. Hey, that's great. In other words, there's a lot of social needs here in Israel, and that's why Vision for Israel has many programs to help people in various ways. These last 2 years, we've been running nonstop, delivering bomb safety shelters, delivering food parcels, delivering school supplies to children, financial vouchers, and the list just goes on and on. We have a lot more work to do, and it'll probably never end, which is why we need your help now. Please watch this short video about all the social welfare projects we're running at Vision for Israel. We all know that since October 7th, 2023, Israel has faced really tremendous challenges, not only because of the death and destruction that happened along the southern border of Israel in many of our communities, but also across the northern border, to where at one point we had over 100,000 Israeli residents and citizens, both Jews and Arabs alike, who had to evacuate their homes. So it's been a very multi-layered challenge in order to meet the needs of the people of Israel. And that's where Vision for Israel has come to the forefront, networking together across the country with as many others as possible in order to meet the needs of people. And this is all from both security concerns to safety concerns to welfare concerns to even to the children who have lost their education and schooling. Welcome back, friends. Well, I just want to remind you all to give a thumbs up, write us at info@visionforisrael.com, and tell your friends all about this channel. Well, we're coming to the end of this week's program, so I'll just quickly run through some of the other big stories making headlines in Israel this week. To start with, Iranian officials are meeting with European officials this week to try and negotiate a new agreement regarding nuclear issues. Candidly, I don't think there's much to negotiate since Iranian leaders have made strong commitments to continue enriching uranium, and that is an absolute deal breaker for everyone else, including the Europeans and maybe even including the Russians and the Chinese. In any case, the Europeans are telling Iran that unless a new agreement can be hashed out by the end of August, they will reimpose snapback sanctions that were lifted in 2015 as part of the JCPOA nuclear deal. To make a brief comment on this, the JCPOA seems like something that happened a very long time ago because so much has happened since. I'm somewhat bewildered as to why we're even still talking about it. I guess the Europeans think they need to go through the motions here, but the reimposition of these sanctions seems kind of like a foregone conclusion at this point, and I wonder how much more Iran can take before the Ayatollah regime finally cracks. Hopefully not too much more. The people of Iran deserve better than to be ruled over by those lunatics and psychos, and the rest of the region deserves better than to have them as neighbors. Another story this week involved the interception of a ship of fools trying to run the blockade of Gaza. This time the group called itself Scientists for Palestine, and their boat was met by the Israeli Navy 100 kilometers off the coast of Gaza. The crew filmed the interception, which was completely nonviolent, and the ship was unceremoniously towed to Ashdod, where the crew was unceremoniously deported, and that's pretty much the whole story. I hope that's the last time this stunt is attempted. It was always really lame, but now it's getting kind of stale too. Now I want to continue the tradition, like the song goes in Fiddler on the Roof, tradition, of ending these reports with some good news, so here it is. Israel's Rafael Defense Systems announced this week that it has signed a $2 billion deal to supply Romania's Air Force with the Spider air defense system. I didn't even know there was one. This will be good for Israel's economy, of course, but it will also give Romanians and all Europeans another layer of defense and deterrence against the possibility of facing the kind of missile attacks that Israel endured from Iran during the Operation Rising Lion in June. It makes me proud that lessons learned and technology delivered by Israel will be used to keep the peace in Europe, and if that doesn't work, it will be used to protect Europeans from danger. Well, with that, I'm Barry Siegel, and this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel. God bless you and shalom. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love thee.